Hello and welcome back everyone to Big Data Days 2024. We're already at the last breakout sessions for today. And as usual, we save the best for last because this session we're going to be listening to Suzannah Hicks, who is presenting from the US today. Suzannah is currently the AI strategist for Merchants Fleet, the fastest growing fleet management company in North America. She's leading the AI strategy and development at Merchants, including AI solution development, data, and AI governance strategy, and leading the organization data and AI literacy learning programs. Suzannah is also currently in the final stage of completing her doctorate in business administration in organizational development. Her dissertation title is The Adoption of an Organizational Data Culture, Applying the Theory of the Fusion of Innovation to Drive Organizational Change. I'm quite sure she is here to tell us more about that specific research topic. Suzannah, it's a great pleasure to see you back again, second time at Big Data Days. I'm super excited that you're here, and really I cannot wait to learn what you have to share today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. This conference has really taken off, so very exciting. All right, so let's get to it. So we are going to be looking today at organizational data culture, but we're going to be specifically looking at the relationship between organizational decision-making styles and data analytics maturity level, not necessarily data maturity level, but specifically data analytics maturity level. So Jan already gave me a nice little introduction, but I'll just say a few words. I am the data and AI strategist for Merchants Fleet, fourth largest fleet management company in North America, fastest growing, and just recently voted by Inc. magazine as the most innovative. So it's a really exciting company to be in right now as we begin our AI journey. I've got over 15 years of experience in data analytics, business management, strategic planning, problem solving, and I'm really, really passionate about the bridge between the business and the data and tech world, and really and bringing in the idea of an organizational data culture, because we live in a data world now. This is just the way it is. So it does need to be instilled across the entire organization. As John also pointed out, I am weeks away from completing my doctorate degree in organizational development. And as he mentioned, my dissertation topic is the adoption of an organizational data culture, applying the theory of diffusion of innovations to drive organizational change. It's really exciting. And what we're going to be seeing here today, after we kind of get some initial foundational ideas out of the way, I'm going to be presenting my initial results of my research. The final dissertation, of course, once I finish my defense, will be available later this year, and anyone who's interested will be able to see the entire results of all my primary research. So this is very, very exciting. I'm not aware of any other currently published work around organizational data culture and how to measure it. I could be wrong, but nevertheless, let's see what I found. So this is not new, but the number one impediment that organizations continue to face and that they continue to report, the number one impediment to really getting the ROI from their data analytics has been consistently reported in the new Vantage Partners, which is now Wavestone, their Data and AI Leadership Executive Survey, which now I believe is in its 12th year of publication. They have consistently reported that the absence of an organizational data culture is their primary obstacle. Specifically, the last 4 years, it has been consistent across the board, listed as the number one impediment. So I think that's really interesting. They also, in this study, highlight that it is an organizational objective, but they have not achieved it yet. So people are thinking about it. They understand that it's necessary, but they haven't been able to get there quite yet. That being said, what is an organizational data culture, right? So we kind of all probably understand organizational culture in general, but when we talk about a data culture, we're talking about these shared beliefs and values, artifacts, attitudes, etc., specifically around data that goes completely across the organization, ultimately to be to enable and support data-driven decision making. The idea of a data culture is not meant to replace or come in and take over the dominant underlying organizational culture. Every organization has its own. This would be a subculture as part of the larger organizational culture that is the DNA of the organization itself. But the idea is that if you achieve an organizational data culture, that these shared practices and behaviors and beliefs about data are also ingrained in the overall organizational DNA. There are many, many, many benefits, and these have been documented over the last several years. Again, partly from the New Vantage Wavestone surveys, but in many other journals and studies that have been done. You can count on a 5% increase in productivity, 19% increase in overall profitability, that when you have organizations that have adopted data-driven decision-making. I don't know about you, but that should get any CFO to pay attention. You're going to gain operational efficiency as well as organizational growth. It actually empowers employees to make recommendations. When they have data to back up their recommendations, they are more likely actually to speak up. So it's kind of it's a bit of a freeing mechanism, and it really empowers those employees to speak up when they feel they've got the data to back up what they're saying or recommending. Obviously, if you've got data-driven decision-making, we're replacing guessing and biases as much as we can when making these decisions. And as I said, it provides an equitable decision-making environment. If you're making decisions based upon that are data-informed, data-supported, it's going to be a more equitable environment. So there are data maturity components that are needed for a data culture to exist. Now, we are specifically talking about things like environment, skill sets, who you need. This is a standard data maturity. We've all seen these little stepwise. Where are you in the data maturity curve, and the things that are really, really important as it relates to being able to support and have a data culture is the need for a data strategy. And of course, you have to have accessible and trusted data. As we all know, it starts with the data, but the data needs to be trusted and available. You need a strong governance program to govern your data. There's also a great need for organizational data literacy, spreading that completely across the business. So we break down the silos of that knowledge so that it's not just in the tech and data realms or with those particular people, but it needs to go across the organization. This is one of the things that I do in my role is I'm working to we're not going to make everybody a data scientist or even data analyst, but there does need to be a baseline knowledge about data. So that is a key part of a data maturity. And then you need strong data leadership. And this isn't just within the data and tech areas of your business. This is from the top down that really support the idea of an organizational data culture. And then finally, the two absolutely key points for a data culture to exist is you must have and be doing data analytics and making data-driven decision making. And we're going to talk about those two things. Those are the 2 points that I've researched, and we're going to talk about how they relate to measuring a data culture and what's needed there. So that being said, let's talk about organizational data analytics maturity. This is specifically data analytics maturity. This is not data maturity, which we just discussed. There is an assumption within this study that there's a certain level of data maturity that an organization has reached before you could move on to measuring analytics maturity. But what we're talking about here is analytics maturity is how an organization is using their data. How are they actually using their data to perform and conduct analytics to support the organizational goals and objectives, those strategic goals and objectives that they set out? Is the organization actually using data and analytics to support those things? It's a measurement, as I said, of how they're using their data to make decisions. Are they making data-informed decisions? There are key components within data maturity that are absolutely necessary in order to achieve analytics maturity. If you don't have that foundation, if you don't have data governance, if you don't have organizational data literacy, data strategy, accessible, and obviously if you don't have trusted and accessible data, you can't do analytics. So there is an assumption here that when you're measuring analytics maturity, that you've already reached a certain level within the data maturity level. And we need to understand this because we have to understand our current state, as you do with any change program. That being said, and this is how I'm defining it within my current research, and we're going to talk about a few other things that are specific to this research. And there's a construct that goes into the beginning of this research, which we are assuming, and we're accepting the assumption that a mid to high level of data maturity is required to achieve analytics maturity that is needed for an organizational data culture. And that's important. We're going to come back to that. So we've talked about analytics maturity. The other aspect of my research is about decision-making styles. And there are 4 types, which we'll talk about in just a second. But as we know, there's many, many, many factors that go into decision-making. We are human. We like to think that we are completely rational human beings, but anyone who's familiar with decision-making science, etc., particularly Daniel Kahneman, who we sadly lost this year, with his idea of thinking fast and slow, etc., we are not completely rational beings. We tend to make our decisions within the context. They're behavior-based, they're contextual data-based. But within this particular study, we need to understand what an organization's dominant decision-making style is. And you can determine that. That was something I was able to survey. Now, there are 4 types of decision-making within this research. This is based upon the Vroom and Yetton model of decision-making. And these 4 types are decisions are made by the individual alone based upon only their information. So they are making these decisions almost in an autocratic manner, with no collaboration, no other information than what they currently have. And the second is they are made in a cooperative manner, but again, still only using the information that they have. From there, we have decision-making style 3, which is the decisions are still made alone by the individual, but now they are making decisions with additional information. And we can understand information here to mean data. So they're making decisions now with data, but still alone, not collaboratively. And then finally, type 4, this is where decisions are made by the manager or stakeholder, whoever it happens to be, in a cooperative manner, as well as using information from others. So these are the 4 types. And for this study, it's really important you need to establish what is the dominant decision-making style within your organization that you're looking at. So these definitions are important, and we're going to come back to this. So how do you measure if you have a data culture or not? I mean, this is a very this is a construct that's really hard to measure. I mean, and if we want to talk about it statistically, this is a latent variable that is very difficult. It's like success or happiness. How do you measure things that are almost unquantifiable? So for my research, I had to find a way to establish whether an organization has a data culture or not. So this is specific to this research. To establish whether an organizational data culture exists or not, you have to have a combination of the two things we just previously discussed: analytics maturity and what kind of dominant decision making. For an organizational data culture to exist within this specific context, there must be a mid to high level of analytics maturity reached, as well as organizational decision-making style of type 3 or 4. And just as a reminder, types 3 and 4 were the two types that added additional information when making decisions. 3 was they make decisions with other information, but still making them alone. And type 4 is they're using data, making data-informed decisions, but also in a collaborative manner. So the two key points here is type 3 or 4, which are the types that involve making decisions with data. Those are key. So you need to measure these two constructs. You need to understand what the data analytics maturity is of your organization, and then you need to establish whether or not the organizational dominant decision-making style is either type 3 or 4. If in your study, we're going to talk about the measurement instruments in just a second, if in your study you are able to measure and the dominant decision-making style is either type 1 or 2, you definitely do not have a data culture. And those are areas that would need to be worked on. So within my research, I'm using two previously unrelated instruments for measuring these two things. From what I have been able to uncover, these two instruments have never been used in conjunction. We do have an instrument that is specific for measuring analytics maturity. This was published by Chen and Nath in 2018. It's publicly available. They saw a lack of there being a quantitative measurement instrument specifically for data analytics. There are plenty of data maturity assessments out there. We know that. We've all seen them. Every consulting company probably has their own. And then there's, the big ones, whether it be McKinsey or Gartner, Forrester, et cetera. There are many, many, many data maturity assessments, but there are not very many data analytics maturity assessment. Chen and Nath saw this as being a gap, and they created their own. So that was used to measure analytics maturity within the organization. That was the case study, if you will, of my work. The second instrument for determining dominant decision making is Frankowski's decision-making questionnaire. This is different from, there's a lot of DMQs, and they're called DMQs. This is a little different. This is specifically asking questions. It's a series of 20 questions on a 1 to 5 Likert scale of either definitely no or definitely yes. And we use this instrument, which at the end of this, you will have a score, and you will know what the dominant decision-making style is of the organization. All right, so before we get into the findings, I just want to reiterate again the 2 key points that are absolutely necessary, the criteria, if you will, of an organizational data culture existing or not, is a mid to high level of analytics maturity and either dominant decision-making style 3 or 4, which are the ones that involve using data or additional information. So in my study, I surveyed a mid to large sized US-based for-profit company. The entire organization was invited to participate. It was completely anonymous. And they were asked to complete these surveys, which I combined into one instrument, along with a few demographic questions, such as level within organizations, such as C-suite, vice president, manager, so on. And then I also asked them if they were decision makers or not. So very few demographic questions, mostly really focused on these 2, analytics maturity, and then the dominant decision-making style instruments for survey. An additional note, we did have a we had a good response rate of 20%, so I was happy with that. The specific research questions within my dissertation, so of course you have to have defined research questions and hypothesis, etc. My 3 research questions that I really was looking to understand, investigate was 1, understanding the relationship between the organizational's data culture and its analytics maturity level. I'm also looking at, again, the relationship between an organization's data culture and its decision-making style. So we're looking at the relationship there between organizational culture and these 2 key points that were assessed: analytics maturity and then decision-making style. And then the third question is, what's the relationship between the data analytics maturity level and the decision-making style? So we wanted to understand these relationships, see if there were any correlations, etc. So what did we find out? What have I found out? Here are the initial results and finding. Taking each question in turn, I was able to, doing correlational analysis, and there were many other statistical models that I ran, but again, findings. Within this organization, I was able to prove research question 1 hypothesis to be true and reject the null hypothesis, to be able to say that there was a moderately positive relationship between organizational data culture within this sample and their analytics maturity level. And we had a correlation coefficient of 0.66. It's not incredibly strong, but it is a positive relationship. Research question 2, looking at whether or not there's a relationship between data culture and decision-making style, also measured a moderately positive relationship with a coefficient of 0.44. So not quite as strong as the first, but it did prove that there is a relationship between these 2, and that we're looking at positive relationships. So that's great. So I've been able to reject the null hypothesis for both question 1 and 2. And shown that there are relationships. So let's look at question number 3, which I find this one particularly interesting, and you'll see why in just a second. So again, moderately positive relationships. So in my research, I have been able to prove all 3 of my hypotheses to be true, that there are moderately positive relationships between these important variables that I'm measuring. Now, in number 3, we are measuring the overall data making style, but I also looked at and ran correlation analysis against the overall analytics maturity score of the organization. And I ran a correlation analysis against that with each decision-making type. With decision-making type 4, reminder, collaborative and data-informed, extremely high correlation, positive correlation here of 0.96. That's a really, really interesting finding, and I'm digging more into that. So with that, we can kind of, again, causation and correlation are not the same thing, but if you have a decision-making type 4, it's giving you an indication that you likely are going to have a higher analytics maturity score. This is something that I believe deserves much more deeper research. And I'm working on that now to see if I can understand this, but that also may be something that I highlight as future research. I thought that was extremely interesting. The other 3 decision-making types against analytics maturity were fairly low. There was a correlation, but below even the 0.44 here. The coefficients were quite low, but with type 4, extremely positive, highly correlated score here when we look at the Pearson correlation coefficient for these 2 things. So what does this tell us about this particular organization? Well, if we look at it from a very, literal criteria-based, that what we are saying organization and data culture is within this context, which is a moderate to high analytics maturity level and either decision-making 3 or 4, we do meet those literal criteria. So the organization, their analytics maturity score on a scale of 0 to 1 or -1 to 1 is 0.56. So we have a moderate analytics maturity score for this organization. And then the dominant decision-making style of this organization is type 4. Now let's think about that for a minute, because the score on a scale of 1 to 5 is only 3.5, which is very mid-range. It does say that was the one that they scored highest on, but it's not a very, very high score. So probably work to be done there in their data and how they make decisions. I will say when it came to types 1, 2, and 3, the scores got higher as you progressed from 1 to 4. So type 3 had a score of 3, and then 1 and 2 had scores in the 2.0 to 2.9 range. So that to me was very significant, but obviously work to do there because the average score when we looked at this for the organization was only 3.5. This does indicate that this particular organization is moving in a positive direction towards an organizational data culture, or that one exists in infancy. It's in its early stages because they've met the criteria of a maturity level within data analytics in the moderate range, and we do have data-driven decision-making happening. So on that note, this tells us that the organization is using collaborative and data-informed decision-making, and this is extremely important and an absolute must criteria within the context of this research. The analytics maturity score, however, while being in the moderate range, there's work to be done there. And the instrument actually measures analytics maturity across 3 factors. And I didn't get into that here, but there were 3 factors that we were looking at. One was process level, one was tech and data capability, and then the third was integration and management support. What I saw was that there was they were lacking in some areas. What was shown that the organization does have is that the organization is aware of the positive benefits of data analytics. And when it has been used, there have been positive results. However, analytics in general is not used across the organization on a wide scale. It is not coordinated in any way. So these are ad hoc projects that are going on in rather a unmanaged style. Like I said, and they're not being run from a central decision making, or like they're not coordinated. They're just happening. So there's also a lack of proper budgeting and human resources. There was when asked about the question of, does your organization have the necessary budgetary resources and or the human resources, the survey indicated from the organization that it does not. So more funding is absolutely needed, specifically for analytics, and human resources are needed to be increased to increase that analytic capability. If we look at leadership, this was also interesting. The leadership from my research, the data analysis shows that the leadership very positively shows that they recognize all the benefits of analytics, that it's important, that they're going to reap all the benefits that I discussed earlier, efficiency, productivity, etc. They get it. They understand it. However, they're not showing enough commitment and they're not promoting it. So it needs more support. They understand it, but the support for analytics and increasing analytics maturity is not there within this organization. So that gives us room to grow. That's where we now get into the recommendations for this specific organization, which would be the organization needs to make analytics a priority. If they really want to achieve optimal success, the senior leadership needs to really include specific adequate funding towards these efforts, proper resourcing, and ultimately commitment. They need to be committed to increasing their analytics maturity. They need to get it organized. They need to have it coordinated, etc. They need to fund it and make sure they have the resources if they are going to achieve optimal success and a higher level of data analytics maturity. Another thing that I'd like to point out, as this study was using two previously unrelated instruments, I do think that this experiment, if we want to think of it from this research from an experimental framework perspective, the promise of this being a good framework for measuring and understanding if an organization has a data culture and where they are on that innovation curve, I think that there is great promise in this method. I have conducted deep confirmatory factor analysis and structural equation modeling to validate the instruments with this data, and what I got back, the results I got back were they completely validated that they're strong. It's there, so I think that this may be a good framework if you are interested in understanding these particular points within your organization. I was very pleased with that. One thing that we need to think about too, and I'll just scroll through these quickly so they get up on the screen. When we're talking about using this as a framework, I would recommend for best practices that a data maturity assessment be conducted before engaging the analytics maturity assessment, because my research has an assumption that it's there. We did not measure that. But I think best practices, if we were going to actually put this into practice as something to drive change and actually use in an organization, is that you would do a data maturity assessment first to confirm that the organization has at least a moderate level of data maturity in order to complete the analytics maturity assessment to reach the level that's necessary. That's how I would do it if I were doing this in a practical way. Now, with any research, we have some limitations. This research was conducted on only one organization. Obviously needs to be, for future research, it needs to be multiple organizations across multiple industries and geographical areas need to be conducted to confirm any of these findings. However, of the employees of the organization that were surveyed, we got a good response rate of 20%. So I think it is a good, it gives us a good look at where this organization is, but there are some limitations. You know, there's always limitations with self-reported survey data. People tend to rate their organization or themselves higher than someone else might, or what might be the objective answer, etc. But overall, I was pleased with the results. But for future research, I would recommend, and I may try to do this again with multiple organizations to see if I get the same findings. And then lastly, I'll just mention, again, these are the initial findings. There's going to be much more in the published dissertation. And that final dissertation is going to be available to anyone who wants it later this summer. I suspect around June, end of June or July, this will be available. If you're interested in those final results, my email and LinkedIn information is in this presentation deck. I'd be more than happy to share the final study with anyone who wants it. And of course, then it will be publicly available in ProQuest for anyone who wants to look at it later. So with that, I'll say thank you. And Jan, let's take some questions if we have some.
Thank you so much, Suzannah.
Look in the chat.
This was excellent, and I think it's well, there's no need to publish your dissertation anymore. I think you've already given
right. I'm done.
Defense. Good. You might have already seen it, but there were actually quite a number of questions that came in during the whole session.
Okay.
I have 5 in total, so
okay.
I'm not sure if we're going to be able to manage it, but I'll start with the one that was most upvoted. 5 people thought this was an interesting question. So let me project it on the screen. The question is, do data-driven decision-making styles emerge naturally from a high data maturity level, or does a strong data culture need to be fostered to leverage that maturity effectively?
That is an extremely interesting question. And this research is not able to say which one is true, which one is, it's the chicken or the egg, which one is driving the other one. What we have is we've got this incredibly high score between decision-making type 4, which is collaborative and data informed, and analytics maturity. So the best way to answer this question right now is that I think they drive each other. Mm-hmm. That certainly if the dominant decision-making style within an organization is collaborative and data informed, they are more likely, as you would think, to have a higher level of analytics, because you can't do data informed decision-making if you don't have the data.
Correct.
Now, whether or not a higher data maturity level will turn around and drive data decision-making, I would think so. But I can't say conclusively. So I think that they go hand in hand, and they likely drive each other. Which I'm not really answering the question, because this is a very difficult one, right? Which one is driving the other? But again, I think that would be something to dive deep into it. When I did the factor analysis to look at which one was loading, they both loaded, the factor loadings loaded very within the same the same range of score. So what I can say is that there is a relationship, and it has a strong positive linear relationship. I don't know which one's driving the.
Yes. Okay, good.
Right.
I think that's an excellent answer for a very, very difficult question.
Oh, yeah.
Let me go to the next one, which is from Katina. We also received a lot of votes, so let me show it on the screen. How can companies balance the need for data-driven decision-making with the importance of human intuition and expertise?
So I am of the mindset that the human always has to be in the loop. And I know we hear that saying all the time. I I do not recommend as a strategist that you only use data to make decisions. I think that you have to have both. What you don't want are decisions that are made only on intuition, expertise, etc. And honestly, in most organizations, according to the research, that is how CEOs and C-suites typically are still making the really, really important strategic decisions. They are not using data to do it. Yeah. That is our human nature, is to trust ourselves or what worked before. But you need to bring in some data to help inform your decision making, to balance that out. But I don't think there's ever I will never make a case that you remove the human. You have to have that experience, that intuition.
I had one of the other speakers in one of the previous sessions, which was way before it was morning in the US, but he kind of mentioned around the way in which we're now using generative AI and language models, etc. And he says we still need to understand that is trained on existing data. Correct. So in order to come up with a creative new idea for the future, it might not be contained in the data that the model is trained upon.
That's right.
Is it something you share?
Yeah. If the model doesn't have the data, it's not going to be able to give you a right answer. And if the model has been trained that 2 + 2 is equal to 5, that's all it knows, and you're not going to get a correct answer.
I
find it very interesting that many of the open generative AI models, one of their data sources, obviously it's the internet, but they're using Wikipedia. Okay, but we all know that Wikipedia is not completely correct all the time. So I find that very interesting that these large language models that are open for everybody, one of their data sources is Wikipedia. So you gotta be careful, I think.
Absolutely. This morning when I did the keynote from the opening part, we started to talk about the benefits, but also the disadvantages of this synthetic data, because you see now that a lot of language models and AI solutions use synthetic data to drive new model development, which is basically training on data that was artificially generated, and that could potentially lead towards a lot of issues.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Absolutely.
We still have time for one or two more questions, so I'm gonna I'm diverting as always. Next question is from, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing it, but Swaminathan Rajamanikan. And the question is, can I say that one of the positive outcomes from running a data literacy program is the increase or improvement in data analytics maturity score?
I would say 100%. I believe that and maybe that's just my opinion, but there are many of us. I mean, we've got Jordan Morrow speaking tomorrow about data literacy, and I believe he would agree with me. If we can increase the literacy and the understanding of data across the organization, I believe that is a key way to increase your analytics maturity, period. And it is necessary.
Good. Then let's go to, this is a slightly more in-depth one, so I'm going to project it.
Okay.
Perhaps you could share more about the data source of your findings to convince us of the significance level of your statistical test, specifically regarding the sample population size as well as the coverage of regions in the world.
Right. So this will be, I would recommend you read the final for this one, but there were some limitations, etc. But we did, within the statistical, there was a a priori power analysis conducted to make sure that I did receive the needed level of responses to meet the level of statistical significance that was met. And then I conducted both a structural equation model as well as a confirmatory factor analysis, which were also the instruments that created these two survey instruments. I used those again to validate that the data and the models fit together, that the models were a good fit for the data that we had. And when it came to outliers, honestly, there weren't that many. Now, I will say, what we did see is it's the bias that you see a lot in surveys where you're either being asked to evaluate yourself or your organization. When you look at the number on the scale of 1 to 10, which was the Likert scale for the data maturity analytics instrument, there were a lot of 10s, right? There were a lot of, and there were some that were just 10s across the board. For future research, I might throw those rows out because I don't know how reliable they are. That may be one of those where they just go through and just click 10, right, all the way across to be done with it. So that's certainly something to think about. The data, and this I didn't get into here, but neither data set was normally distributed.
Okay.
They were not normally, the data sets were not normally distributed. So the tests that I used for skewness and kurtosis, et cetera, I did go through and model those significantly to understand what the data looked like. And neither set showed normal distribution, which, you could go down so many paths just on that alone. So there was a lot of statistical testing done on the instruments with this data, and it will be in the final. Research.
Great, thanks, Suzannah. I see one final question coming in, which I would like to discuss because I kind of think it summarizes your story quite well. And it's a question from Ruby Tinoin. And she's asking, how do you unlock the full potential of data and analytics to inform and improve organization decision-making processes? I thought this might be a good.
How do you get there? Well, part of me wants to say I wish I knew. That's my goal in life, is to figure that out. You do have to have analytics maturity, right? But I think what it really, really comes down to, and some of this answer is based upon my previous work experience. If the leadership of the organization is not committed and willing to put budgetary resources, human resources, and be committed to it year over year, you're not going to get there. If you don't have that leadership at the very top level, you can have the best data scientists in the world, you can have great data, et cetera, but if it's not a strategic priority, you're not going to get there.
Yeah, I fully agree with it. I think that the strategic aspect is ultimately one of the most important aspects to take into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. So
good. With that, Suzannah, unfortunately our time is up. And I would once again like to sincerely thank you for being a part of Big Data Days 2024 this time. I'm super excited for you that your research and PhD is almost done. So I assume that by next year we can call you doctor.
I certainly hope so. I hope there's not any curveballs. Also, anyone who has any questions, please connect with me either through my email, which is at the end of the deck, or through LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to discuss this at length if you want to discuss some of this more statistical and nitty-gritty of what I'm finding. More than happy to engage with anyone who'd like to discuss this study more. There are limitations to this study, and I fully am aware of that. But that's true with everywhere. I think this is a beginning. I don't think this is an end of researching this question.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Suzannah. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear you talk again.
Wonderful.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to bring us already towards our closing keynote for today. And for today, we have our first speaker at Big Data Days, which is George Farushian, who's the founder of Lights on Data. And in 10 minutes, he's going to give us his final keynote, which is A Bite of Clarity, the role of metadata in business and AI. So stay tuned for the last session of the first day of Big Data Days 2024. I'll see you in the next session.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Suzannah.
Bye-bye.